I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and in this tutorial, you'll create this design using HTML and CSS clip paths. Now I'm actually going to be using Figma in this tutorial, and the one reason I like using Figma is that it's web-based, so no matter if you're on Windows or Mac, you'll be able to get started, and they have a free tier, so there's no limitations for you to actually use a really powerful program like this for prototyping. Now you actually don't need to use a program like this in order to achieve this effect. You can create the clip mask and shapes like this in the code without ever using something like this. But what this allows you to do is to really see the design before you actually create it, and you can actually export the SVG from this project or from this program and use it in your code. So with that said, let's actually start mocking up our design here. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to hit F on my keyboard to bring up the frame tool, and then I'm just going to drag out to create a new frame here. And then I'm going to make sure that the width is 800 and the height is 700. And then let's go ahead and rename this just to image. Then I'm going to head into my downloads here and pull in an image that I'm going to be using. That's different than the one above. And then I'm just going to come in and hold shift and then resize that down until it fits into the frame the way I want. So something like that I think looks good. And then what I can do is I can select this frame and hold Alt or Option and then drag to the right to duplicate it. And then we can just call this clipped image. And the next thing I'm going to do is create rectangles which are going to act as a mask on this image. So to create rectangles, I hit R on my keyboard, and I'm just going to go ahead and come up to this corner and just drag out a rectangle here. It's something like this. And then I'm going to hold Alt or Option again to duplicate that. And then let's make this one about the same width, but let's make it just a little taller and just offset it just a little bit. Then we can hold Alt or Option to duplicate that again. And let's make this one thinner and wider and just offset it just a little bit to the right. And then again, hold Alt or Option. I'm actually going to make sure this one's touching the bottom edge. And let's make this one even thinner and not as wide as well. And then just kind of like maybe center it, something like that. And let's go ahead and make some of these a little bigger. So something like this. All right, so I think something like that looks good. And then what I can do is I can select all four of these rectangles here. I'm going to group them and then call this just mask. And with these four rectangles selected, I can come over here and click on Distribute Vertical Spacing. And what it's going to do is it's going to space those out evenly to one another. So the spacing between right here from each shape is going to be the same. So if we zoom in here and look at that, you can see that's 33, 33, and then this one's a little hard to see, but it is 33 as well. With that, I'm going to then just copy this mask, paste it, and then drag it out of the frame so we have it here outside of this. So we have a reference to what that actually looks like. And then with this mask, we can drag the image on top of the mask, then select the image in the mask grouping, and then click on this icon to create that mask. And there you go. That's essentially all you have to do in Figma in order to create the effect. Now, the only thing that's left to do in Figma is to export our image and then export our SVG. So we want to first select the image frame here, come over to export, select JPEG, and then export image. And I'm just going to export it here to my desktop. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come into the mask here. I'm going to export this as well, but I'm actually going to export this as SVG and then export the mask. And then again, just saving that to the desktop. All right, so that's everything we needed to do in Figma. So let's just go ahead and close that up. And I'm going to create a new folder here and just call this, just rename this folder to clip path. And then I'm going to click on the folder and drag it into Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code is just the code editor that I choose to use. And if you want to be using some of the extensions and stuff like that I'm using, I definitely recommend using Visual Studio Code. And it's also free, so you can just download it and start coding with me. All right, so now that we have this open, underneath this little section here that says the title of our folder, we can create a new file. And let's go ahead and call this file index.html. Then let's create a new file called styles.css. Then I'm going to come into the index.html, and I have an extension called HTML boilerplate that allows me to just type in HTML. And when I type that in, I get this option here to insert some boilerplate, which is just some basic starter code. And once I do that, I can go ahead and under this, where it says link style sheet, I can say where I want where I can pull in the styles that we just created. So that's going to be styles.css. Then we can get rid of some of this code here. And the first thing we want to do is we want to create a div that's going to be the background image. So I'm going to go div class equals, and I'm going to give this a class of image, and then just do a backslash and then close that out because we don't need to put anything in between this. Then this is where we're going to pull in the SVG. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to call this images. Then I'm going to come into my desktop here. Come into both the image and the mask SVG, and then drag it onto this image folder. Then what I can do is I can open up this SVG, and then I can see all the SVG code. So then I can just copy this, come into my HTML here, and I'm going to paste that in. Now I'm actually going to change and do a couple different things here. And the first one is just add a class here to the SVG. I'm going to call this SVG clip. I'm going to change the width to 100% and the height to 100% as well. And just go ahead and get rid of the view box and fill because I don't need that information. Then what I'm going to do is just go ahead and get rid of the fill here for each of these rectangles because we don't need that either. And now this is where the actual magic happens, the thing that we're going to be using, which is the clip path. So in order to create a clip path, it's actually really easy. All you have to do is wrap these shapes in a clip path tag. So to do that, you just create a new clip path tag, passing in an ID of whatever you want to name this clip. And I'm just going to name it clip, just to keep it simple. Then we can take this rectangle and then paste it in between this clip path. And that's basically everything we need to do. Now, let's actually get this up in our browser so we can actually see these changes. And what I'm going to be using is a free extension here called, it's called Live Server. So if you type that in here into the extension marketplace, you can see it here, and just go ahead and download that. And once you download that and have that installed, what we can do is we can come into the index.html file, right click, and then say open with Live Server. So that's going to open up our project here. And right now you don't see anything. That's because we need to add some CSS to this. So let's go ahead and just move this to the left so you can see the browser and the code. Then we can come into our CSS. Then I'm going to click here to collapse that menu. And then I'm going to write the CSS. And the CSS that we have to write is actually really simple. The first thing we need to do is we need to target the image div, which is what our background image is going to be. And to do that, we can go ahead and set a background image here and setting the URL to the path of the image. So that's going to be in the same folder in the URL, or excuse me, in the images folder, and then the name of that image is this image JPEG. Then we can say background position is going to be center. Background repeat is going to be no repeat. And here we can say clip path, and then what we want to clip path to be, which in our case is we're going to set to a URL. And that URL is going to target the name of the ID, which we named clip. And it's important to put this hashtag because that identifies that it is an ID that we're actually targeting. All right, so let's go ahead and save that. And now you can see, you're starting to kind of see something here. And one reason or one way we can actually fix this is to go ahead and set a width and height of both the image and the SVG clip. So let's go ahead here and set a width to 800 pixels, which is what we did in Figma. Then a height of 700 pixels. So let's go ahead and save that. And now we can see that is looking nice. And then we can go ahead and on the SVG clip, we can set a width to 100 and a height to 100% as well. So let's come back into the index and you can see that SVG clip is what we're naming this SVG item. So that's basically the effect, but now you can see once we scale this to the right, it's not, resizing. And there's a really easy way to fix that. So let's come back into the styles here and let's add a media query. And to write a media query, we do @media. We're going to be targeting the screen and we're going to be this is going to be initialized once the max width of the screen is 800 pixels. So anything at 800 pixels or less, it's going to apply these styles to it. And the styles that we want to apply is on the image class. And we just want to set the width here to 100%. So let's go ahead and save that. And now once we resize this, you can see now that this is smaller and it fits the screen better. Now you might be thinking, hey, I don't really like how this is lined up to the right. Like you kind of like some of that spacing and offset that was from this image here. Now one way you can fix that is if we come back into the index HTML, instead of using absolute values here like 583 pixels and 182 pixels and 71 pixels, so on and so forth, we can actually use percentages and that's going to help make this responsive. So let's say, for instance, here on the first rectangle, we want the width to be 80%. So we can type in 80%. And we want the height to be something like 20%. So if we go ahead and save that, you can see that it looks a little bit different. So if you want to make that a little taller, you can. But for just simplicity's sake, I'm going to keep it as is. Now, the next thing we want to do is, let's say on this one, we want it to be the same width. So 800%. And on the height, we want it to be a little taller. So let's do 30%. And we save that. Now you can see the spacing's a little off because that's because we're still using absolute values here. So let's say we want a spacing of 5%. What we need to do is we need to take the height of the previous element, which is 20%, and add 5 to it, which would be 25%. So if we save that, you can see now that that's scooted up a lot closer. And then we can set a percentage value here on the X or the left offset as well. And we'll do that at 10%. All right, so now we can repeat a similar process here for the third rectangle. And on this one, let's do a width of 90% and a height of 15. And on the Y, we want to take the previous Y value of the second rectangle, which is 25, add the height of the second rectangle, which is 30, so that's going to be 55, then add the spacing we want, which is 5%. So 55 plus 5 is going to be 60%. And then we can offset that by 5%. So we save that. You can see the spacing now between here, or the first rectangle, and the second and the third are all the same. All right, so now the last one is going to be just 80%. We can set a height here to 10. Again, we want to set the Y to the height here of 60 plus 15, which is going to be 75, and then add 5 to that. So it's going to be 80%. And let's go ahead and offset this by 12%. So if we save that, you can see now that we get a similar effect, but this time we're using percentages instead of absolute values. Now, before I show you how this is responsive, I do want to say there were some things that I was considering when I was using these percentages. And one of them is the height. That was really important. We wanted the height to equal or be around the total height of 100%. So you can see here, if you add in all 20, 50, then 15, and then 10, it's going to be relatively close or a little less than 100%. And another thing you want to keep in mind is that with spacing, you have to consider the spacing as well. So in the end, this Y value, the last one, 80% plus 10% is either going to equal 100 or be a little less than 100. So with the height and all the spacing, I made sure that the total height is 90%. All right, so that's enough of that. Let's go actually show you how this is actually responsive. So let's go ahead and just drag this over. And you can see that it keeps the offset and it also resizes. So it looks good on smaller screens. And if we drag this out, you can see how that changes. And that's how you can use clip paths in order to create an effect like this. Now, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. And be sure to check out our other design and web development tutorials on our channel. Again, I'm Hunter from SkillThrive, and I'll see you in the next video.